Hi, friends. Today I'm going to talk about a very intriguing psychological horror film from 2022 called Don't Worry, Darling. Set in the 1950s, Alice and Jack live in a typical American town. They spend time with friends, have fun, drive around, and love each other. One day, Alice is getting ready for a party with friends while Jack heads off to work along with many other white-collar workers. A female voice announces that it's day 997. All employees are on their way to headquarters, and all residents are safe and accounted for. The ladies are wished a good day, and Alice gets on with household chores before heading to her dance class, like all the model wives in this town. The instructor, Shelley, reminds them that beauty is in control and grace is in symmetry. After class, Alice returns home, chats with her neighbor Bunny, who constantly scolds her children, and goes to take down the dry laundry. A tune keeps running through Alice's head, and she hums it as she works. Suddenly, she notices another neighbor, Margaret, standing in front of her house, seemingly oblivious to everything around her. Alice starts cooking, but one of the eggs she picks up seems suspicious. She squeezes it, and it turns out to be empty. She crushes the rest, but there's nothing inside them either. Her attention is only broken when the meat on the stove starts to burn. In the evening, she meets her husband, looking stunning in a beautiful outfit and hairstyle at a well-set table. However, Jack decides to start with something more enjoyable than dinner. The next day, the women are lounging by the pool, but Alice is distracted, bothered by the tune playing in her head again, accompanied by a vision of women dancing in wigs. Later, she goes to the town model, running her finger along the streets, and as she moves beyond the town's borders, Bunny grabs her. It's time for the cocktails that the children are serving. Meanwhile, the men are having conversations on seemingly distracting topics. Everything is proper, sunny, and peaceful. A signal sounds, and Shelley welcomes new residents. She's thrilled that the couple can learn from her husband Frank, who has created something extraordinary, a new world. Her speech is interrupted by Margaret, who says she and her husband shouldn't be here. Her husband hurriedly drags her away, and Frank, who has now appeared, apologizes to the guests. He explains that the couple is going through a rough patch, and their task is to chase the dream and fight the chaos, the main enemy of progress. They're all changing the world. The guests echo Frank's words, expressing how happy they are and how they're all one big family. Frank thanks Jack for supporting their husbands, as they are the backbone. The celebration continues. Alice looks for Jack, but instead finds Margaret, who tells her she's having nightmares and that she doesn't belong here. Margaret's husband suddenly pulls the curtain closed on Alice. She finds Jack at home, and they get intimate. But in the heat of the moment, Alice notices Frank watching them with a smile. Later, the women gather at the mall and talk about their perfect lives and poor Margaret. Alice feels sorry for her neighbor, but Bunny thinks she brought her troubles on herself by taking her son into the desert. They found her, but the child was gone. The conversation shifts to what the men do at work. Nobody knows for sure, but they say they're making weapons there. Bunny cuts it short, saying it's none of their business. Women also have their roles, creating comfort. That night, Alice has a nightmare, but as always, sends her husband off to work in the morning and takes care of the house before going for a drive. She stays alone in the tram, saying she just wants to take a ride. Suddenly, she sees a plane crashing into the mountains. Alice yells at the driver, but he doesn't understand what she wants. She urges him to help the victims, but he sticks to his route and can't deviate. Alice jumps out of the tram and runs toward the mountains. She walks through the desert for a long time, then comes out to a road and climbs a high hill. As she approaches, she stops in front of a mirror-like glass. There's no one around, just her reflection. Alice reaches out to the glass and loses consciousness. She finds herself surrounded by darkness and dancing women, while a male voice calls for order, saying people must allow themselves to see what life should be like. The next moment, Alice wakes up in her bed. Walking into the kitchen, she sees Jack making dinner amidst a mess. Many groceries have gone bad. Alice doesn't understand what's happening, and Jack explains that she was already asleep when he came home from work and that she took the tram home. Alice is confused. Did the driver come back for her? But now it's Jack who looks confused. Alice convinces herself it was just a dream. The next morning, everything goes on as usual. Alice sends Jack off to work and starts cleaning a window. But suddenly it seems to move. She's pinned against the wall, gasping for breath. In the next moment, the phone rings, and Alice is completely free. Margaret's voice on the line begs her to get out of there because she was there and saw everything herself. Alice sees the dancing women again, but this time it's herself and her friends. And then, instead of her reflection, Margaret appears on the other side of the mirror and starts banging her head against it. Alice screams and snaps out of it. She runs home and sees Margaret standing on her roof. Turning to Alice, Margaret slits her throat and falls. Alice screams in horror as staff rush over and carry away her neighbor's body. That evening, she tries to explain it to Jack, but he doesn't believe her. Margaret is in the hospital. She accidentally cut herself while cleaning windows. Alice feels guilty, knowing her neighbor asked for help. What's happening around her? She asks Jack what he does in the project, but he says he can't talk about it. He asks her to stop her hysterics, as she could ruin everything. At night, Alice watches a commercial for their town and feels like she's drowning in a pool she can't escape from. The next morning, while cooking, she suddenly wraps her head in plastic wrap. It's as if she's trying to snap herself out of it, but the suffocation doesn't help, and she tears the wrap off. The doctor who comes by assures her it's just nervous tension since Alice witnessed Margaret's fall. Alice insists her neighbor slit her own throat. The doctor offers to prescribe pills, but Jack refuses. They'll manage on their own. The doctor assures her that Margaret will recover soon and return home. He leaves, forgetting his case, from which Alice manages to pull out a file on Margaret, but all the text is blacked out and impossible to read. Alice burns the file. She drinks alcohol and again sees the dancing women, then finds herself in the bathtub. Jack is upset. They're late. He brings her a dress and then asks Alice to consider having a child, promising a wonderful evening ahead. The couple arrives at a restaurant where all the townsfolk are gathered. The entertainment for the evening is a performance by a stunning blonde, and Alice again sees the dancing circle and Margaret's death. She feels unwell, but nobody notices. Frank gives a speech and invites Jack to the stage. He's ready to congratulate him, as Jack is now part of the elite council and presents him with a token of loyalty, a ring. The audience applauds, and Jack performs a dance of gratitude. Alice, unable to watch, runs to the restroom. She sees a vision of a different Jack who lost his job. Bunny finds her puzzled. Alice tries to explain something, but her friend cuts her off with a question. Was Alice at headquarters? She's lost it, acting like a spoiled child. Her job is to support her husband, but she's ruining his career and behaving like Margaret. Returning to the hall, Alice watches Jack's triumph and restrains herself. In the morning, Jack reminds her that they'll have guests in the evening. They need to show appreciation to Frank. Alice greets the guests with a smile. Everything is perfect as always. Jack meets Frank while Alice finishes the appetizers in the kitchen. Frank walks in and suddenly starts talking to the hostess. He's sorry Bunny didn't believe her, but she didn't believe Margaret back then either. He'd been waiting for someone to challenge him for so long. The guests sit at the table. Alice deliberately takes the host's seat, and Jack obediently sits next to her. The conversation is casual until Alice asks why all the women in town are from 1 or 2 states at most, and why they all vacation in the same places. Jack tries to steer the conversation away, but Alice says they all met their husbands in a train under similar circumstances. Their stories are the same because they're told what to remember, but sometimes they recall the forbidden. Frank is doing something to them all. The man smirks, reminding her of her nervous breakdown. Why doesn't she get help, and why was she at headquarters? Jack is horrified. Was she at headquarters? Frank continues, saying she broke the rules. It's a result of psychosis. But she opened up to him in his bedroom. Alice is stunned by this terrible lie, but Jack believes Frank without question. She tries to make the guests see reason. Where do the products come from and what's in them? But Shelley interrupts. She won't allow her husband to be insulted any further. The guests leave. Frank is disappointed. He expected more from her. Jack, having seen everyone off, returns to the house. Alice tries to explain that he's the most important person to her, begging him to leave. To go anywhere, just together, and Jack agrees. They leave the house and get into the car. Jack then apologizes to Alice, and in the next moment, staff pull her out of the car and drag her into the darkness. Alice finds herself on an operating table. Visions with her husband flash before her eyes. A doctor leans over her wearing a mask, and she realizes it's herself. In the next moment, Dr. Alice finishes an operation and heads home, where her unemployed husband waits. He didn't cook dinner because he didn't know what she wanted. There's no hot water either. Alice is exhausted after standing at the operating table for 30 hours, so she refuses her husband's advances. He sits at the monitor, listening to an ad for a new simulation. And again, A sunny morning in the idyllic town. Alice returns to her surroundings. Bunny enthusiastically greets her, sharing the latest news. Alice hugs her children, not noticing her friend's worried look. Her husband leaves for work. Alice takes care of the house, dances, swims, and meets Jack. She pulls the roast out of the oven, and Jack chooses a record, humming the tune that seems to wake Alice up. Jack walks through the dark city and enters his apartment. Meanwhile, his physical characteristics are announced. He is perfectly fit to participate in the Victory Project with his girlfriend Alice and takes on the responsibility of maintaining his wife's body. Alice sees herself in bed, restrained and hooked up to wires. Jack cares for her body because he must exit the simulation daily to work and pay for it. The man lies down next to her, humming the tune Alice now hears. She realizes he deprived her of real life, but he did it to save her from constant work. Frank created this world so they could live as they wanted. Jack works himself to death for this. But isn't she happy? But what about the others? So they are really prisoners? Jack hugs her, but Alice hits him over the head. The next moment, Bunny finds her. Jack is dead, and Frank is immediately informed. Bunny confesses that she knows everything about the simulation. She chose this life herself because here she can be with her children who are alive. But the other women know nothing. Alice has to run, or they'll kill her. Alice goes outside, gets into Jack's car, and drives into the desert. Staff cars give chase, but Alice maneuvers and causes a crash, killing the doctor. More pursuers follow her. Frank is informed and orders her to be stopped at all costs. In the next moment, Shelley stabs him with a knife. He's a fool and has ruined everything. Alice races towards the mountain, but near the top, the car breaks down, and she runs the rest of the way. Staff chase her, and there, ahead, is the dome. She reaches it just as her pursuers are within reach, and suddenly feels her husband's hands on her shoulders, begging her not to leave him. Alice reaches out. Darkness falls. Visions of the perfect life in victory flash by, and a gasp comes from the woman awakening in reality. It's a situation where it's hard to take sides. The husband deprived his wife of reality with good intentions, trying to make her happy. And surely many would want to escape into a simulation to avoid daily problems. But can you really make someone happy by force?